The evening of Ethan and Emma Harrington's 40th wedding anniversary was supposed to be the apotheosis of their seemingly flawless life. Their Greenwich Village mansion, a veritable palace built, as it would later turn out, on a foundation of lies and others' pain, blazed with 1,000 lights. Guests, the cream of local society, bankers with wives dripping in diamonds, politicians with rehearsed smiles, art figures seeking patronage, filled the spacious drawing room, where crystal chandeliers cast iridescent reflections on the polished parquet floor, and waiters in snow-white gloves silently circulated with champagne. Emma, in an elegant sapphire-colored dress that flatteringly accentuated her still slender figure, and the silver in her artfully styled hair, seemed the hostess of this ball of life, smiling, accepting congratulations, but a shadow lurked deep in her eyes, noticed only by the most observant. Ethan, as always, was the center of attention. Tall, still attractive, despite the gray at his temples and a barely noticeable paunch, he exuded the self-satisfaction and authority of a man accustomed to getting everything he wanted from life. He laughed loudly, clapped acquaintances on the shoulder, and his voice, deliberately loud, drowned out the murmur of conversation. When it was time for the traditional toasts, Ethan, glass in hand, ascended a small dais specially set up for the evening. He surveyed the guests with a triumphant gaze, letting it linger on Emma for a fraction of a second longer, and in that look there was not a drop of warmth, only cold calculation and a predatory assessment. The room fell silent. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She knew her husband too well not to have noticed the subtle change in his demeanor in recent weeks, this growing causticity, as if he suspected something was groping in the darkness of her years of silence. 40 years, Ethan began, his voice taking on theatrical notes. For 40 years, my dear Emma and I have walked hand in hand. Many of you have witnessed our journey, our, so to speak, joint ascent. He paused, savoring the attention. And today, on this momentous day, I want to be perfectly honest. After all, honesty is something that has always been valued in our family, isn't that right, Emma? He looked at her again, and a wicked glint flashed in his eyes. Emma felt her heart constrict. This was not just a toast. It was the beginning of something terrible, his preemptive strike, an attempt to paint her as unhinged, vengeful, should she dare to speak out. So, my dear, Ethan continued, turning his whole body towards her, as if they were alone in the crowded room, all these 40 years, I haven't loved you. Not for a single day. You were simply convenient. The words fell into the deafening silence like stones. Glasses froze in hands, smiles slid from faces. Emma felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back, burning her cheeks. She saw the blurred faces of the guests, heard her own rapid pulse drumming in her ears. Convenient. He had said it. Said it in front of everyone with that signature smug smirk of his, as if he had accomplished something witty and daring. Rage, cold and sharp, surged within her, sweeping away the remnants of fear that had lived in her for decades. No, he would not make her out to be crazy, not today. She slowly rose from her seat. Her movements were measured, almost regal, despite the trembling in her knees. Her gaze was fixed on Ethan. Convenient, you say? Her voice was surprisingly even, though a little lower than usual. A steeliness had entered it that Ethan had probably never noticed in her before. Well, Ethan, if we're speaking the truth today, then I have something to say too. A truth that will explain a lot. And why I stayed with you all these years. Somewhere in the front rows, her sister Chloe let out a strangled moan, and the tinkle of breaking glass pierced the tense silence. Chloe's glass had slipped from her weakened fingers and shattered into tiny shards at her feet. Chloe's face was ashen, her eyes wide with horror. She knew. She knew part of the truth, and that part had tormented her for all these long 40 years, turning her life into a slow torture of guilt. Emma momentarily shifted her gaze to her sister, a mixture of sympathy and resolve in her eyes. Then she looked back at Ethan, who no longer seemed so self-assured. Surprise, mixed with poorly concealed anxiety, flickered across his face. He clearly hadn't expected such resistance. "When we got married, Ethan," Emma took a step forward, her voice growing stronger, "I was pregnant, but the child wasn't yours." A new gasp swept through the hall. The guests, forgetting their decorum, eagerly hung on every word. "I loved another man, his name was Liam, and he didn't just disappear as you've liked to hint all these years, he was murdered." She paused, letting the words sink in. Ethan opened his mouth to object, but Emma raised her hand, stopping him. "And I have proof. Not just of your lies, Ethan, but of much more." She slowly retrieved an old, worn, leather-bound diary from her small evening bag. "This is Liam's diary. He wrote in it every day, about his suspicions, his fears, and his love for me. He left it for me, as if he had a premonition of disaster." She clutched the diary erfolg, this silent witness to tragedy and her years of pain. "And you know, Ethan, there are some very interesting entries in here about you, about your dealings, about why Liam became so inconvenient for you." Beside Emma, almost unnoticed, her son Noah had appeared. Tall, with Liam's piercing eyes and his mother's determined chin, he calmly looked at Ethan. There was no hatred in his gaze, only a cold, mature assessment and a readiness to stand by his mother to the end. He had known the truth for many years, and this evening was their joint plan, meticulously constructed and dearly bought. Ethan's gaze shifted from Emma to Noah, and for a moment fear flickered in his eyes. The game he had played for so long was clearly not going according to his script, and this was only the beginning. Ethan Harrington froze, his face, just moments before, contorted in a smug grin, now a mask of astonishment and poorly concealed fury. He tried to say something, perhaps hurl another insult or an accusation of madness, but the words stuck in his throat. The sight of the old diary in Emma's hands, her calm yet resolute gaze, and Noah standing beside her like an unshakable rock, all of it had clearly thrown him off balance. His plan, to humiliate Emma, to present her as vengeful and unstable, and then to triumphantly conclude the evening basking in another round of admiration from his sycophants, was crumbling before his eyes. His vaunted self-assurance cracked. "What nonsense are you spouting, Emma?" he finally managed, trying to imbue his voice with its usual authority, but notes of panic still slipped through. "What diary? What murder? You seem to have had too much champagne. Or perhaps years of living with me have finally taken a toll on your sanity." He attempted a smirk, but it came out pathetic and unconvincing. His gaze darted to the guests, seeking support, but he saw only a mixture of curiosity, shock, and, in some, poorly hidden schadenfreude. This house, built on his lies, seemed to be pressing in on him with its very walls. Chloe, Emma's sister, meanwhile, seemed to have found her voice, or rather, her years of pain and fear erupted in an uncontrollable torrent. She rose, swaying, her face contorted with suffering. "He's telling the truth. Emma's telling the truth." Her voice broke into a cry, drawing everyone's attention. Shards of the broken glass crunched under her shoe as she took a few unsteady steps forward. I saw Liam shortly before his death. He was scared. He said Ethan had threatened him. He'd dug up something terrible about Ethan's business. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving dark tracks on her expensive makeup. All these years, she had carried this burden alone, afraid of Ethan, afraid of shattering Emma's already fragile world, and this silence had turned her life into a living hell. Now that the dam had broken, words poured out of her, disjointed, full of despair. Ethan set it all up. He always sets everything up. He's a monster. Ethan turned purple. "Shut up, Chloe. You've always been unhinged," he roared, his false respectability sloughing off, revealing the ugly essence of a tyrant. "Who's going to believe a hysteric who's been on pills for years?" He took a step towards her, but Noah blocked his path, stepping between him and Chloe. "Don't you dare touch her." Noah's voice was quiet, but it held such a menace that Ethan involuntarily recoiled. The young man, whom Ethan had always considered merely an annoying appendage to his convenient wife, now looked at him with eyes that promised nothing good. "You've ruined her life enough, and my mother's life, and the life of my real father." Noah spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "I've spent years, Ethan, gathering evidence of who you really are, and believe me, my father's diary is just the beginning." He cast a meaningful glance at a thick folder he had been holding behind his back, which he now placed on a nearby table for all to see. "There's something for me here, too, something you tried so hard to hide." Emma watched her son with pride and pain. He had grown into a true man, despite his childhood and youth being spent under the oppression of a father, like Ethan. She opened Liam's diary, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the yellowed pages, covered in familiar handwriting. Liam wasn't just a young man in love, Ethan. He was an intelligent and honest man. And he began to understand that your successful deals, your sudden riches, were more than just a businessman's luck. Her voice regained its strength. "Here, listen." She found the page she was looking for. October 23rd. E.H. was furious today. I asked him some uncomfortable questions about the transfer of funds through the offshore company, Sirius Trust. He told me to mind my own business if I wanted to live long. His eyes, I've never seen so much malice. It seems I've stumbled onto something really dirty. I'm afraid for Emma if he finds out about us. The silence in the room became almost palpable. Guests exchanged glances. The name Sirius Trust was familiar to some of the financiers present, and from their changed expressions it was clear that this information had sparked far from idle thoughts. The schism in society that Emma had foreseen was beginning to manifest. Some of those who, just a minute ago, had been fawningly smiling at Ethan now tried to inconspicuously move away, as if afraid of being tainted. Ethan's arrogance began to give way to poorly concealed panic. He scanned the room with a hunted look, searching for anyone who would take his side, but saw only condemnation, curiosity, or fear. At that moment, a short, stocky, middle-aged man with a face that boded ill for anyone who crossed him detached himself from the crowd of guests. It was Frank McAllister, former head of security for one of Ethan's early companies, a man Ethan had once ruthlessly set up and thrown out to cover his own machinations. Frank slowly approached Emma, gave a short nod to her and Noah, and then turned to Ethan. There was no smile on his face, only cold determination. "Long time no see, Ethan." His voice was low and even. "I see karma does exist after all. And I must say, Emma, Noah, you are very brave people." He took a dictaphone from his inner jacket pocket. "I always knew you were a slippery character, Harrington, and after you screwed me over, I decided to take some precautions. I have some very interesting recordings of our conversations, the very ones where you so colorfully describe how you solve problems with inconvenient people. and how you optimize financial flows through shell companies. I think the police will find this very interesting." Frank pressed a button, and Ethan's distorted but recognizable voice, giving cynical orders, poured from the device. Ethan Harrington turned so pale his face resembled a wax mask. He looked at Frank McAllister, at Emma, at Noah, at Liam's diary and the folder of documents, and understood that this was the end. His empire, built on lies, blackmail, and possibly blood, was crumbling, and he was being buried under its wreckage right here, in the drawing room of his luxurious house, which now seemed like a prison to him. The recording on Frank McAllister's dictaphone continued to play, filling the Harringtons' luxurious drawing room with poisonous truth. Ethan's distorted but unmistakably recognizable voice, giving orders to neutralize a competitor or resolve the issue with a prying journalist, sounded like a death sentence. The guests, who until that moment had maintained at least a semblance of propriety, now made no secret of their horror and disgust. Some ladies pressed their hands to their mouths, men frowned, and those who were in any way connected to Ethan through business dealings tried to become as inconspicuous as possible, as if fearing their names too might be mentioned in these shocking revelations. The house that just an hour ago symbolized Ethan Harrington's success and respectability had now become the stage for his public disgrace. Ethan stood in the middle of the room like a cornered animal. His face was contorted with rage and helplessness. He no longer tried to feign arrogance or offended innocence. The mask had been torn off, revealing the ugly face of a cornered criminal. His eyes darted from Emma to Noah, from Chloe to Frank McAllister, as if searching for a weak spot in this unexpectedly closed ring of accusations. But he saw only steel, determination, and the righteous fury that had been building for years. "This is all a setup," he finally exploded, his voice cracking into a shriek. "They're all in cahoots. This crazy woman," he jabbed a finger at Emma, "her unhinged sister, this loser," a nod towards Noah, "and this blackmailer," a contemptuous glance at Frank. "They want to destroy me, to take everything I've built with my hard work." He tried to appeal to some sense of justice, to common sense, but his words sounded false even to himself. Ethan Harrington's hard work had always been lies, manipulation, and the ruthless elimination of obstacles. Emma met his furious gaze calmly. "Your hard work, Ethan? Or the hard work of those you deceived, set up, destroyed? Those like Liam?" She opened the diary again. "Liam wasn't just afraid of you, Ethan. He was gathering evidence. He realized that your charitable organization, Ray of Hope, which you loved to flaunt, was actually a front for laundering dirty money. Money you received from your partners in very dubious circles." This new accusation hit Ethan harder than the previous ones. Ray of Hope was his pet project, his alibi, his shield against any suspicion. He had so carefully cultivated the image of a philanthropist that he had almost come to believe it himself. The mention of the foundation in such a context was like a punch to the gut for him. Noah stepped forward, holding his folder. "And we don't just have Liam's notes, Ethan." I continued his work. "After Mom told me the truth, I knew I had to. For him, for her, for myself." He opened the folder, and copies of bank statements, offshore accounts, and photographs of Ethan's meetings with people whose faces were well known to the police, but not in connection with charity, spilled out. "I found traces of your donations, Ethan. They led to very dark places, and I found people willing to confirm how your Ray of Hope really worked. People you also considered convenient until they knew too much." At that moment, a commotion was heard at the front door, voices, footsteps. The guests standing closer to the exit parted, and several men in stern suits, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers, entered the drawing room. Leading the group was a middle-aged detective with a tired but shrewd gaze. He surveyed the assembly with a keen eye that lingered on Ethan, then on Emma and Noah. "Ethan Harrington?" The detective's voice was calm, but boded no good. "We've received some information requiring immediate verification, and by the looks of it, we haven't come to the wrong address." He nodded towards the dictaphone in Frank's hands, Emma's diary, and Noah's folder. "Looks like you're having quite a party here, and we're just in time." Ethan stared at the police officers like a bull at a red flag, his face contorted into a grimace of hatred. "This is all lies, a provocation. You have no right," he yelled. But no one was listening to his protest anymore. One of the police officers approached him. Emma felt years of tension drain away. She had done it. They had done it. For Liam, for justice. She looked at Noah, and in his eyes she saw not only determination but also relief. Chloe, supported by one of the guests, was crying now, not from despair, but from a strange, painful liberation. Frank McAllister watched the proceedings with satisfaction. His revenge was complete, but it was more than just revenge. It was the restoration of justice, albeit belated. The detective approached Emma. "Mrs. Harrington, if you and your son are willing to give official statements and provide the materials you have." "Of course, Detective," Emma replied, her voice firm. "We've been waiting for this day for a very long time." Ethan, seeing that all was lost, tried to make one last desperate move. He lunged for the exit, pushing aside the stunned guests, but the police were ready. A short, awkward struggle, and Ethan Harrington's hands, the man who considered himself master of his fate, were cuffed behind his back. His arrogance had vanished, leaving only malice and fear of the inevitable. The guests parted before him as he was led to the exit. Shock, condemnation, and, for some, poorly concealed satisfaction were written on their faces. Ethan Harrington's empire, built on deceit and cruelty, had collapsed in a single evening, to the sound of a shattered glass and a truth that had waited too long for its hour. And Emma, Noah, and Chloe stood amidst the chaos, not yet fully comprehending that the 40-year nightmare had finally ended, and a new, unknown, but decidedly more honest life was opening up before them. But this was not yet the end of the story. Too many threads led from Ethan. Too many people were involved in his dirty dealings, and the exposure of just the tip of the iceberg promised new, perhaps even more dangerous turns. When the door closed behind Ethan Harrington, leading him away from the luxurious house that would henceforth be associated not with success, but with disgrace, a heavy, tense silence hung in the drawing room. The guests, who had just witnessed the collapse of an entire era, had not yet recovered. Some hastily said their goodbyes, trying to leave the place where the air was literally saturated with scandal and crime as quickly as possible. Others, on the contrary, huddled in groups, whispering excitedly, eagerly discussing every detail of the drama that had unfolded before their eyes. The house, built on lies, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, rid of its hypocritical master. Emma felt drained, yet strangely light. The 40-year burden she had carried on her shoulders had finally been cast off. She walked to the window and watched the receding lights of the police car. It was the end of one life and the beginning of another. Noah stood beside her, his hand firmly on her shoulder, offering silent support. Chloe, having calmed down a little, sat in an armchair, her gaze fixed on a single point, as if reliving all those years of fear and guilt. The detective, who introduced himself as John Riley, approached them. "Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Harrington, Miss Edwards," he nodded to Chloe. "We'll need to go to the station to file official statements." I understand this evening has been difficult for you, but the sooner we do this, the better." His voice was calm and businesslike, but his eyes held poorly concealed respect for the courage of these people. "Of course, Detective," Emma replied. "We're ready." Frank McAllister, who had handed his dictaphone to one of Riley's assistants, also came over. "Emma, Noah," he extended his hand. "You did what many wouldn't have had the courage to do. If you need anything, any help, here's my card." "Thank you, Frank." Noah shook his hand firmly. "Your help today was invaluable." As they prepared to leave, a peculiar division was taking place in the drawing room. Most of the guests, especially those most closely connected to Ethan through business or social ties, had disappeared almost instantly, as if fearing that their proximity to Harrington might cast a shadow on them. However, there were also those who stayed, who approached Emma and Noah with words of support. An old friend of Emma's, whom she hadn't seen for many years because Ethan disapproved of their friendship, hugged her with tears in her eyes. Several of Liam's former colleagues, who had only now learned of his fate, expressed their sympathy and admiration for Emma's courage. The schism in society that Emma had foreseen was not just a schism, but a kind of purification. Those who valued honesty and decency remained by their side. The trip to the police station and giving statements took several hours. Emma, Noah, and Chloe recounted everything they knew in detail, omitting nothing. Liam's diary, Noah's folder of documents, Chloe's testimony about seeing Ethan in the area where Liam was hit on that very evening, his strange behavior afterwards. All of this formed the basis of the accusation. Frank McAllister also gave a comprehensive statement, providing additional information about Ethan's methods and connections. When they left the station, it was already dawning. New York was waking up, the city living its usual life, unaware of the dramas unfolding behind the closed doors of its luxurious mansions. Emma took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. It smelled of freedom. "Where to now?" Noah asked, hugging his mother and aunt. "Home," Emma replied. "To our home. It doesn't belong to him anymore. Now it's our home, and we'll start a new life there." But she knew it wouldn't be that simple. In the following days and weeks, Ethan Harrington's story dominated the front pages of newspapers and television screens. Journalists unearthed such details of his career that society was in shock. It turned out that Serious Trust and the charitable foundation Ray of Hope were just the tip of the iceberg. Ethan was connected to an international network of money laundering, real estate fraud, and even, it was suspected, several unsolved disappearances of people who knew too much or stood in his way. His arrogance and belief in his own impunity had played a cruel trick on him. He left trails, believing no one would dare to go against him. Emma and Noah faced a new reality. On the one hand, there was immense relief and a sense of justice. On the other, intense media scrutiny, sidelong glances from former friends, and the realization that they had destroyed a man's life, albeit a man like Ethan. Noah, taking charge of the family assets, those not frozen during the investigation, and of course Liam's trust fund, which Ethan had never managed to get his hands on, discovered that Ethan had tried to involve him, Noah, in his dubious schemes, grooming him as his successor, unaware that his son had long been gathering compromising material on him. Chloe began seeing a psychotherapist. For the first time in many years, she felt she could breathe freely, but the burden of the past still weighed on her. However, the support of Emma and Noah, as well as the knowledge that she had helped restore justice, gave her strength. One evening, as the three of them sat in the drawing room, the very one where it all began, the phone rang. It was Detective Riley. "Mrs. Harrington," his voice was serious. "We have some news regarding your husband's case, and I'm afraid it may concern you. It seems Ethan Harrington had very powerful patrons, and they are not very happy that he started talking. Emma felt a chill run down her spine again. She looked at Noah. His face was serious. They understood that Ethan's arrest was not the end. It was just the beginning of a new, perhaps even more dangerous battle. Ethan was merely a pawn in a larger game, and those pulling the strings were not going to give up so easily. Detective Riley's words hung in the air, filling the drawing room with a new, chilling tension. Powerful patrons. Ethan had talked. These phrases echoed in Emma's mind, erasing the last vestiges of euphoria from their recent victory. She had always suspected that Ethan, for all his cunning and cruelty, couldn't have built such a sprawling criminal empire alone. There must have been those who stood behind him, who directed and covered for him, taking their cut of the dirty money. And now, these invisible puppeteers were obviously concerned that their marionette might reveal their secrets. "What does that mean, Detective?" Noah asked, his voice calm, but with an underlying steeliness inherited from his mother and perhaps from Liam. "Is Ethan being threatened, or are we—" "We can't say for sure yet, Mr. Harrington," Riley replied. "But we've received information from a reliable source that Ethan is under serious pressure in prison. They're trying to silence him. And there's reason to believe that if that doesn't work, they might try to get to you, as the main witnesses and instigators of his exposure. The people he was involved with would stop at nothing to protect themselves." Emma felt Chloe beside her give a barely perceptible flinch. After so many years of fear, a new threat seemed particularly cruel. But Emma was no longer the intimidated woman she once was. 40 years of life with Ethan, though filled with pain and lies, had hardened her. She looked at Noah and saw not fear in his eyes, but determination. "What do you suggest, Detective?" Emma asked. "We can provide you with protection," Riley said, "at least for the time being until the situation becomes clearer, and we strongly advise you to be extremely cautious. Avoid public places unnecessarily. Don't trust strangers and report any suspicious incidents to us." After the detective's call, the atmosphere in the house changed. The sense of liberation was replaced by anxiety. They had won a battle, but the war, it seemed, was just beginning. Noah immediately set about strengthening security measures in the house, contacting a private security agency recommended by Frank McAllister. Emma tried to remain calm, supporting Chloe, who was beginning to withdraw into herself again. In the following days, they lived as if under siege. The constant presence of security, a check on every call, every visitor. It was exhausting, but necessary. Noah, delving into Ethan's financial documents that had been seized, uncovered more and more threads leading to very high-ranking people. Politicians, judges, major businessmen, whose public reputations were impeccable, but whose names surfaced in Ethan's encrypted reports. "They were all in on it, Mom," he said one evening, showing Emma another money-laundering scheme through sham charity auctions, in which many of those who had recently been guests in their home had participated. Ethan was the perfect operative for them. Greedy, unscrupulous, and smart enough to pull off complex scams. But he started to know too much, and talk too much when he realized they'd abandoned him. The information from Detective Riley was confirmed. Ethan, finding himself in prison and realizing his former patrons weren't going to bail him out, began cooperating with the investigation, trying to bargain for a lighter sentence. He named names, revealed schemes, handed over evidence, and this made him a prime target. One day, as Noah was returning from his lawyer's office, his car was nearly cut off on a deserted street. Thanks to the quick reaction and skills of his security driver, tragedy was averted, but it was a clear signal. The threat was real. Emma realized they couldn't just sit and wait to be eliminated. They had to act. "Noah," she said firmly, We have to publicize everything we know. All the names, all the schemes. We have to bring these people into the light. Only then can we ensure our safety and achieve true justice." Noah looked at his mother with admiration. Her courage knew no bounds. "You're right, Mom. We'll use all the resources we have. We'll pass the information to trusted journalists, those who aren't afraid to go against the system. We will create a public outcry that won't allow these people to sweep everything under the rug." And they began to act. Using Frank McAllister's contacts, Liam's remaining connections in journalistic circles, and even some of Ethan's former friends, who, now fearing for their own skins, were willing to leak information anonymously, Emma and Noah launched their own information war. It was dangerous. They received anonymous threats several times. They were being watched, but they did not back down. Liam's diary, his notes on suspicions and initial findings became their banner. The story of his love for Emma, his tragic death at the hands of the man he was trying to expose, gave their struggle moral strength. The culmination was a high-profile journalistic investigation, published simultaneously in several leading publications. Names that had previously been whispered in the corridors of power were now on everyone's lips. Resignations, investigations, and arrests began. The system, which had seemed unshakable, began to teeter. On one such day, Emma was sitting in Liam's study, which she had kept almost untouched in the house all these years. She was going through his books, his papers, and she found a small sealed envelope tucked into one of his favorite astronomy books. On the envelope, in her handwriting, was written, "To Emma. To be opened if the world seems too dark." With a racing heart, she opened the envelope. Inside was a short sheet of paper. "My dearest Emma," Liam had written, "if you are reading this, it means I couldn't be there to protect you. But know that love is stronger than fear, and truth always finds its way to the light, even if the path is long and difficult. Don't be afraid, fight, and remember that even in the darkest night there are always stars. Your Liam." Tears streamed down her cheeks. It was a message from the past that gave her strength in the present. She looked out the window. Dawn was breaking, and she knew that, despite all the dangers, despite all the muck they had stirred up, they were on the right path. The battle for justice, which began on that fateful 40th anniversary night, continued, and they were ready to go all the way. Several years had passed since Emma Harrington, on her 40th wedding anniversary, shattered the facade of lies surrounding her life and triggered a chain reaction that shook the foundations of a corrupt elite. The path had not been easy. The threats persisted for a long time, and she and Noah had to endure several very anxious moments when it seemed their invisible enemies were about to strike back. But the public outcry caused by their revelations, and the work of honest investigators inspired by their courage, had done its job. Many of Ethan Harrington's high-ranking patrons found themselves in the dock. Some tried to flee, others used all their influence to evade punishment. But the system they had so long built for their protection began to falter under the pressure of irrefutable evidence and public anger. Not all received their due. Corruption had taken root too deeply, but many were convicted, their careers and reputations ruined forever. Ethan Harrington, broken and stripped of his former arrogance, received a long prison sentence, not least thanks to his own testimony, which he gave in hopes of leniency. His name became synonymous with betrayal and greed. The Greenwich Village mansion, once a symbol of his power, was sold, and a significant portion of the proceeds went to compensate the victims of his machinations and to support the Liam Carter Foundation, established by Emma and Noah. This foundation was dedicated to helping victims of corporate crime and supporting independent journalistic investigations. Emma found the strength to move on. She was no longer a hostage to the past, though the scars remained. She dedicated herself to the work of the foundation, finding new meaning in it. Noah was always by her side, having become not only a successful and honest businessman, but also her main support. He inherited Liam's astuteness and Emma's resilience, and many saw in him a leader of a new generation, capable of changing the world for the better. Their relationship with his mother grew even stronger, having been forged in fire and water. Chloe, thanks to therapy and the support of her sister and nephew, gradually recovered. She no longer blamed herself for her years of silence, understanding that she had been as much a victim of Ethan's manipulations as many others. She found solace in art, taking up painting, and her works, full of pain but also hope, unexpectedly gained recognition. Frank McAllister became a trusted family friend, often helping Noah with advice on security and business matters in a world still full of predators. Sometimes, Emma would take out Liam's old, worn diary and his last letter. The words of love and faith in the victory of truth always filled her heart with warmth. She knew Liam would have been proud of her and Noah. His short life and tragic death had not been in vain. His name was cleared, and his pursuit of truth inspired others. The world did not become perfect. Evil did not disappear entirely, but the story of Emma, Noah, and Liam became a reminder that even one person, or a few united by a common goal, can challenge the most powerful system if truth is on their side. And that love, even when interrupted by tragedy, can give strength to fight and illuminate the path even in the deepest darkness. The dawn she had witnessed after that terrible night of revelations continued, its rays slowly but surely dispelling the shadows of the past, opening the way to a future where honesty and justice had a chance.